Welcome back, my erudite friends, to another episode of MonteCristo's Power Rankings, the Thinking Fans Power Ranking. Now we've had a couple of weeks of competition to gauge where the power levels of these teams are, especially when we take into account strength of schedule. That said, there have been a lot of upsets, so the picture is still a little bit murky, but I've decided to do these power rankings before every stage, about halfway through every stage, and before stage playoffs as well. I think that's a good cadence given my poll on Twitter as to what people wanted in terms of updates to this video series. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get right into it. Starting will be at number 20, the Washington, D.C. Justice. Now, they have had a tough schedule, and they are currently 0-2. They did go up 2-0 against the London Spitfire, but just in terms of their own play, I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that they will be capable of actually finishing off a win against most of the other teams in this league, and perhaps not even any of them at all. London was playing atrociously against the Justice, which was then, of course, turned around by London, but we'll get to that later on. That said, the Justice were not able to close out the series, despite having 3 match point opportunities in which to do so. So, very underwhelming play from the Justice overall, and they will remain at 20 until we actually see them take a win, or at least up their level of play in a convincing fashion. Coming in at number 19 and dropping a spot after last week are the Houston Outlaws. And I'm sure after the upset against the Hangzhou Spark, many Houston Outlaws fans may be wondering why they are still dropping so low. Well, if we actually look at the caliber of their play, I don't think the Hangzhou Spark were playing particularly well in that match, and their latest match they only took a single point across 4 maps against the NYXL. In the first week of competition, I think that they probably should have been able to beat the Toronto Defiant, considering they were up 2-0 and had 3 opportunities to close the map and failed to do so. And then in their second match against Boston, they lost in another map 5, but Boston had a new tank, Fusions, who had just been added to the roster earlier that week with very little synergy with the rest of the team, Axiom on an off roll on the Zarya, and only 1 DPS player because Color Hex was suspended, and that meant that they should have probably been able to win with 2-3 DPS lineups on certain maps, such as the control maps. Weren't able to do that, weren't able to close it out, so Houston still looking mighty unimpressive. At number 18, we have the Florida Mayhem. And Florida, they did get bodied by the Atlanta Reign in week number 1, but they bounced back pretty quickly and actually came up with a win going against the Philadelphia Fusion. However, there is a caveat there with the Fusion in that they did not actually have their main flex support player available, so the Philadelphia Fusion, not the most convincing opponent considering they were not full strength, so take that win with a grain of salt. Florida also then managed to lose to the Chengdu Hunters by, I think, failing to implement their own strategy and playing down to the Chengdu Hunters level. So as a result of losing to Chengdu, they will be knocked down 1 spot. At number 17 are the Chengdu Hunters themselves. Now, you may be wondering how I could put a 2-1 team at such a low position at number 17. And the answer is, well, you know, one of those wins was versus Florida, and it was very close. And the other one was versus Guangzhou Charge, which is a pretty big upset, but also very close. However, they also spent the second week getting absolutely destroyed by the Seoul Dynasty. And given that Chengdu right now is playing a very unorthodox style of Hammond forward Overwatch, and when we saw Seoul not try and sort of play them at their own game, but actually go back to just playing goats and ignoring the Wrecking Ball, Seoul's victory was very impressive. And I think most teams are going to look at Seoul, just say, hey, we're just going to play Reinhardt goats. Whenever Amon tries to engage, we're just going to speed boost away from the Wrecking Ball with the Lucio and clean up the rest of the team. I think that's going to be the way to beat them. You don't try and play their own style of many DPS against them, because they're going to beat you with that experience, and because they play unlike any other team in the league, they're very difficult to prepare for. I don't think that style is going to get them very far until Jachirin, their main tank player besides Amon, gets here. I think that will be when we actually see them start to take off, potentially. But until now, they'll gain a couple of slots on the power rankings because of their wins. Otherwise, don't rate them very highly. At number 16, we have the Boston Uprising, who will be staying in that 16th slot. I think they did play New York, relatively close in week 1. And they did barely beat the Houston Outlaws. But as we saw against the Shanghai Dragons, once Shanghai was actually able to integrate Gamsu, and due to, it seems like, some two-way contract issues with Fusions, they weren't able to play him. I still don't see anything that will allow me to move this team up because they haven't actually had any major wins over really solid teams. Coming up just barely against Houston isn't really something that I rate too highly. But as we get deeper into the season, Color Hex has now been off his suspension for the last week. This is a team that might actually gain some synergy with their new players moving forward. At number 15, we have a big drop, -5 for the Los Angeles Valiant. Some LA Valiant fans might say, well, their strength of schedule was very difficult, and indeed it was. Looking at the Valiant, there's not a lot of shame in losing to teams like the Hangzhou Spark or the NYXL, both of which went to map 5. But then we get to the Toronto Defiant. This is a match that they absolutely should have been able to win, and now they are sitting at 0-3. So they haven't been able to close. Their style looks really one-dimensional right now. Fate, when he can't play the Winston Goats and has to switch to Reinhardt Goats, which is superior in many Goats mirror matchups, has looked very underwhelming and got completely bodied by No Smite in the Reinhardt mirror in that last map of Nepal when they played the Hangzhou Spark. So until we see this team have a little bit better variation of strategy, I'm not really willing to keep them up there in that top 10 like they were before. At number 14 is going to be the Dallas Fuel. And they are not going to move. They were at 14 in the original power rankings. They're at 14 right now. They've shown some upsets, absolutely, notably the Philadelphia Fusion. But again, Philly not exactly at full strength. Due to Boombox being out because of a sickness. However, they also managed to lose 0-4 to the Guangzhou Charge and 0-4 to the San Francisco Shock. So their victories over, of course, the Seoul Dynasty and Philadelphia can be impressive, but they're also getting completely clean swept on certain maps. So it seems like they haven't really figured out their style yet. Although, if we continue to see them in the condition they played against Philadelphia, using AKM primarily instead of Effect, they definitely could go up by the time the next power rankings roll around. At number 13, we have the Toronto Defiant. So Toronto, I think, started pretty weak against Houston, not playing well in that first half, but did have the resilience to bounce back and come back with a reverse sweep. Of course, losing to the Atlanta Reign, not so great, but they did beat the Valiant, and they looked much better, and every match it seems like Toronto is playing better and better and better, so I do have some confidence that they are going on an upward trajectory right now. They're still going to be at that 13th spot, not losing any ground, not gaining any ground, but I think they are a team that could be looking to improve. At number 12, we have the Atlanta Reign moving up 3 spots. A lot of this is because they were very convincing in their debut against Florida, even though the Mayhem didn't play very well. They fought a close match when Philadelphia did have Boombox and their full roster. And then they beat the Toronto Defiant this week. So all in all, 2-1, you're looking at a pretty decent team right now. I don't think they've had the hardest schedule, and we'll have to see if they can continue to play at this level and continue this, winning the majority of their games. That could boost them up. I have a feeling they're going to come back down to earth, but after beating the Defiant, I think it's fair to put them just a little bit ahead of Toronto. At number 11, we'll have the Philadelphia Fusion, and they will be moving down 2 slots. I'm not penalizing them too terribly hard for this last week where they went 0-2 because of their roster issues. But they do need to move down a little bit because we're not sure exactly how long Boombox is going to be out for. And, losing to Florida Mayhem, losing to the Dallas Fuel, 2 teams that have been, I think, below them on the rankings and most everybody's rankings, you do have to consider that and move them down just a little bit. Should they return? to their full roster should they be able to play Reinhardt goats more effectively instead of really committing to that Winston goats, which is something I think they can change stylistically, either with Sado or by putting Fraggy in. I think this is a team that can move right back up to where they were. And that should about do it for the 20-11 power rankings for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in, and be sure to check out my power rankings for number 10 through number 1 coming out soon. Until next time.